We are the Gorn. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is Gopher.
I'm sorry, that was the dumbest opening I've ever done for a review. I am so sorry. Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well because it is my favorite time of year yet again, because we are here to talk about a brand new season of a Star Trek show. Sadly, it's the time of year that's been getting less and less as we've gone on, but we are not here to worry too much about that because we are going to be specifically talking about the 2-episode season premiere of Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This one, Hegemony Part 2, so continuing off the cliffhanger of last season, and Wedding Bell Blues. But before we get into all of that, I know I need to address the thing that y'all want me to talk about first, and that is, I know this is the wrong comm badge. It bugs me too. The one that goes with this uniform broke. I can't fix it, so sorry, you're just stuck with this one. What, do you want me to wear the TNG comm badge? That would be ridiculous, all right? This is the closest we're gonna get. Just live with it, okay?
You don't deserve to wear that uniform.
But as many of you have probably already looked at the time code, I will say this is going to be a little bit of a longer review because I want to talk a little bit about where we're at with Strange New Worlds before I get into the review of 2 episodes. Hopefully, in coming weeks, the reviews will be a lot shorter because we're only going to have 1 episode to talk about and not a whole plethora of other things. But it's been a hot minute since we saw Strange New Worlds last, especially after that big Season 2 cliffhanger. The writer's strike had just kicked off when the Season 2 finale of Strange New Worlds had aired. So we've had to wait a really long time for them to get back to finish Season 3, and now as they're filming Season 4. And we've just had a lot of news come out about the show, as well as I think I need to kind of reset for all of you and myself where I was at the end of Strange New Worlds Season 2, because I think it's going to color how I go into and review Season 3 of the show. Because right now, if you didn't hear, this season premiere kind of comes at a bittersweet moment, not only for Star Trek as a franchise, but especially Strange New Worlds. A few weeks ago, we got the official news that Strange New Worlds was renewed for its 5th and what's going to be its final season, and that its final season is only going to be 6 episodes long. And certainly Alex Kurtzman and Akiva Goldsman and other producers on Strange New Worlds put out a statement when the Season 5 renewal was announced that this was always the plan. They were always going to do a 5-year mission, very on brand for Star Trek, right? But I kind of personally have a hard time believing that was really going to be the goal, because I bet my money that they would have liked to continue this show if they could have. It's felt like it's kind of been the one that has gone over pretty much universally well liked by almost everyone, whether they be, Trekkies or non-Trekkies or, whatever side of culture war nonsense. So I have a hard time believing that that was ultimately the plan. And on top of that, 10-episode seasons have already felt really, really short. And getting us just 6 episodes for a Season 5, it's a really big step down, not only from the 10 episodes, but even the 13 or 15 episode seasons that we got back when Discovery launched. And it really feels like we're just watching that streaming bubble pop in real time, and Star Trek is just being caught in that blast radius. I mean, we're already seeing that a lot with Star Wars stuff. I think the only Star Wars show left on the horizon, at least live action, is the Ahsoka show, Season 2 of that. And I think we're only getting that because it's sort of dealing up into Dave Filoni's Mandoverse movie. And so a lot of these big franchises, I think, hit their saturation point. And I think we're starting to see that wind down as the streaming age has been shown to be, a big bubble. And I think Star Trek's just been caught in that crossfire. And then on top of that, with Paramount finalizing its sale to Skydance, which is certainly up in the air right now for numerous different reasons, you can really feel like the Trek franchise is being prepped for a sort of like clean slate. I mean, Discovery, Lower Decks, Prodigy have all been canceled, and even if Kurtzman's Secret Hideout Company, which has sort of been shepherding the franchise the past decade or so, still remains in control of it with a new contract or whatever under Skydance, it really feels like Star Trek is sort of wiping the board clean so it can have that fresh start under new management, which is kind of nerve-wracking because, as much as I have had my issues with this current run under Paramount, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as we get into the reviews of these episodes, I've at least appreciated the breadth of content that Star Trek has been giving us. Like, even stuff that I haven't loved as much, like Picard, I also get Lower Decks and Prodigy, but it really just feels like we're just seeing everything pull back in. Kind of sad to see Strange New Worlds sort of being caught up in that sort of wiping the slate clean, especially considering it was the sort of standard, to put it a better way, Star Trek show. Felt like it really could have gone on for a lot longer. That being said, we're not completely done yet. There are some things to get excited about even beyond just the next few seasons of Strange New Worlds. Starfleet Academy is on the way, which is actually the show that I'm really the most excited about because it feels like it's going to be trying to at least do something new for Star Trek, even though the Starfleet Academy idea has been floated around numerous times throughout Trek history, kind of even dating all the way back to the original series movie era with Harv Bennett, one of the producers of the Trek movies, wanting to do a Starfleet Academy movie back in the day. But I feel like, especially considering it's building off of Discovery's 32nd century setting, I feel like there's a lot more that we can be doing with Starfleet Academy than necessarily Strange Worlds in terms of pushing it forward. So I am excited for that show. Also, we get the Doctor back, so who's not excited for that? And we're getting at least 2 seasons of that show. So they also announced that kids animated show, which looks like it's going to go right to YouTube. We'll see how that works out. But at least there's something to get excited about. That being said, I am kind of curious to see what's going to happen in terms of leadership of Star Trek. Like I said, Secret Hideout is kind of up in the air of whether it's going to continue with Star Trek when the Skydance sale goes through, if and when it goes through. But for me, the thing that I would be really hopeful for is if we get to see, there was an announcement of a Tawny Newsome comedy Star Trek show. And for me, Tawny Newsome is the person that really gets Star Trek. Not only is she like a fantastic mariner, she's a writer on Starfleet Academy. She's a very clear, creative. And also, if you ever listen to her, I mean, I've had the chance to meet her and talk with her a whole bunch. She's absolutely wonderful. But if you just listen to podcasts and things she's done about Star Trek, she is someone who very much understands, I think, as a Trekkie, what Star Trek is about, both its progressive spirit, trying to push things forward and do new things with the franchise, and trying to like speak to the moment while also showcasing a more positive future. Like, I really think she understands it. So I don't think she's going to be like in the Kurtzman position of like controlling the franchise at any point, but I do hope like her show does go through, even through the Skydance merger, so at least she has like a seat at the table in that room with the people that are at the top of the franchise, having those conversations about the direction of the franchise. So like there is some hope in the future, but also tempered with like, we got a big corporation merger coming around. The streaming bubble is popping. Star Trek is sort of very much a capitalist commodity. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic, but very cautiously optimistic about going forward. But that brings me finally back to Strange New Worlds, because if you caught my big video essay I did about season 2, I had really just mixed feelings about that season. Like, I loved season 1. It gave us, I think, some of the best character work, like really detailed character work, especially for legacy characters and even its new characters in that season. Spock himself, I think one of my favorite episodes of that season was when he had that conversation with Angel, the non-binary space pirate who I fucking loved, who challenged Spock to not define himself by Vulcan or human expectations, but just to be himself.
It's like you're either this or you're that, and sometimes we act a certain way to fit people's expectations, but that's not necessarily who we are. And sometimes, like on the bridge just now, it can limit us.
You are proposing I better balance my human and Vulcan natures.
I'm saying maybe you're neither.
Loved those stories that like fleshed out these characters in new ways that we hadn't seen before, that really felt like we were exploring strange new angles on even characters we knew and then getting new characters as well. But then came season 2. And while season 2 felt like that standard, this is the episodic Star Trek show that, you know, just sort of fits the basic format of what Star Trek is, it really honestly started to feel a lot safer. Not just in like the style of story, but in the types of stories that it was kind of telling. Like, it was coasting on aesthetic without digging into what Star Trek is, of pushing things forward. We did get a few really great episodes, like the Una episode, the Courtroom episode, and the Lower Decks crossover. I think are some of the best this era of Star Trek episodes we've gotten, especially in live action.
Your flagrant disregard for temporal protocols by telling me this is deeply troubling.
But so much else of season 2 outside of that had this very safe ethos of like, we're just going to do standard stories that don't really push the boundaries all that much. And on top of that, it had this kind of like overriding theme of everyone has a destiny that I think kind of goes to the nostalgic prequel setting of Star Trek. Even beyond setting up the Kirks coming in and Scotty's coming in, we had stuff like Ortegas and her whole I fly the ship arc.
Fly the ship? I am Erica Ortegas. I fly the ship.
You know, the show flirts with her wanting to explore different paths and different stations in her life, but ultimately it just seems to say, nope, she should just be grateful that she's a pilot.
Maintaining stability will require piloting Enterprise by hand.
Between the fragments and the gravity shifts, I'll have to make manual adjustments every 20 minutes. Or lights out Enterprise.
I'm glad you get it. We need you here keeping Enterprise safe.
With her literally stating, like, I fly the ship over and over and over again, and ending on this point of, like, oh, I should feel okay where I'm at.
When you do the same thing every day, it's easy to forget how important that thing is, how awesome that thing is. I won't let that happen again. I'm Erica Ortegas, and I fly the ship.
That's fine. I think it's a good message to tell people, like, be okay with where you're at in life. But it's not exactly that exploratory spirit of exploring, pushing out of our identities that I really love Star Trek for. Even the musical episode ended with this musical number about knowing your purpose in Starfleet is to protect the mission.
We know our purpose is to protect the mission.
Which Trek has always been less to me about we must give ourselves to Starfleet's noble purpose, and more Starfleet helps us explore ourselves and others. And if you're Gene Roddenberry, maybe a bit too literally on the exploring others part of that, if you know what I mean. But contrast Strange New Worlds Ortega stuff of like, oh, she should be happy at her station, with Lower Decks, where we have an episode where Rutherford tries different career paths and everyone just cheers him on whenever he tries to do something new.
I'd like to request a transfer out of engineering.
Consider your request granted! Oh man, this is exciting. I'm sure wherever you end up, they'll be lucky to have.
And even when he ends up like choosing to still want to be an engineer where he started, like everyone is super supportive of him exploring other elements of himself, even it helps reaffirm his identity back where he started.
Rutherford, that is outstanding. Gotta be true to yourself. Am I right, Bears? Hurrah!
And that's the kind of energy that I want Star Trek to have, and Strange New Worlds instead seems increasingly focused on reasserting fixed roles, especially in justifying its prequel setting. Because we get stuff like Nurse Chapel, who in season 1 was, I think Jess Bush did this such amazing job of reimagining the character, who is this very one-note kind of sexist trope like lusting after Spock in the original series, and kind of giving her own really unique and strong personality. But then in season 2, just gets reduced back to being Spock's love interest, and certainly done in a less overtly like, oh, Spock, I love you kind of way.
I love you. I don't know why, but I love you. I do love you.
With a little bit more pathos, but it's still all of her stories as a character are centralizing around him and justifying that role for a woman that even Majel Barrett, who played Chapel in the original series, thought was a weak character compared to her other roles like Una or Loxana Troy on The Next Generation.
And like poor little Christine, you know, she was I really felt sorry for her. I never really thought too much of her. I felt she was a weakling, and she probably deserved what she got.
And also in episodes like Charades, which I thought was a very fun Vulcan comedy episode, and even had some good stuff between Spock and Amanda's relationship they haven't gotten to see much in Star Trek, you know, his mother. It would also still had this idea that like genetics equals destiny, that Spock being part Vulcan, part human determines his personality and like who he is, which felt very weird. And given the clip that we have seen from Comic-Con this year of Strange New Worlds Season 3, a later episode in this season, which I did a video on, it still seems like it's kind of leaning into that biological essentialism.
5 Vulcans should be more than enough down there.
4 1/2.
Spock is only half Vulcan, whereas the 4 of us are fully Vulcan.
Is that not logical?
Spock.
Which one would have hoped Star Trek would have moved beyond by this point, but I guess we're still doing. And so I can't help but feel like Strange New Worlds is playing it safe, like narratively safe and narratively conservative. And when I say conservative, I don't necessarily mean like, you know, far-right Trumpian right-wing politics, but like conservative in that it's going back to very traditional stories that are kind of regressive in a franchise that I want to be like about pushing things forward. And it feels like it's really regressing in a lot of that. And I saw that in season 2. That's the lens I'm bringing into season 3. So let's actually start talking about these episodes, because both of them feel technically great. They're, I think, extremely well executed episodes, but I can't help but feeling that they're executing on a playbook that I'm just not excited about. Structurally, Strange New Worlds continues to be the soundest live-action Star Trek show of the modern era. But I have to sit here and ask, after watching both of them, what are these episodes about? Because to be fair, what they're trying to execute, they do really, really well. They're solid sci-fi stories. They're not bad. They're just standard. And standard isn't what excites me about Star Trek. And just to say it from here on out, full spoilers as we get into Hegemony Part 2 first. Obviously, the cliffhanger at the end of Season 2 and Part 1 was trying to do its own best of both worlds cliffhanger, like that famous Riker fire moment.
Mr. Worf. Fire.
And I don't think it quite hits those highs, but really what could? That was one of the best cliffhangers, not only in Star Trek history, but like television history, period. But the ending of Part 1 was really solid, at least. Like, the stakes here were good. We had a bunch of characters we were concerned about in jeopardy, all stuck on the Gorn ship, like La'an, Mbenga, Mustache Kirk, and Ortegas. I call him Mustache Kirk. I know he's Sam Kirk. I just like calling him Mustache Kirk because it's funnier.
Captain.
Samuel Kirk. Welcome to Enterprise. How's the family?
All fine, sir.
And we kick off the episode with, like, some beautiful Star Trek competency porn. Like, this is some of the times where I really love Star Trek because it's just characters in sci-fi situations just being very good at their jobs. Like Pike calmly figuring out how to track his crew on the Gorn ship, listening to all the different advice from his crew members. Amazing. And I really love Pike's classic captain energy here of just like listening to everybody, letting them work it out, and then sort of interjecting as he can, and they just solve the problem together. So like just classic Trek competency porn stuff. And actually them using the radiation to track the ship later on actually reminded me a bit of Spock using radiation from his necklace to track Uhura back in Star Trek Beyond.
You gave your girlfriend radioactive jewelry. The emission is harmless, Doctor, but its unique signature makes it very easy to identify. You gave your girlfriend a tracking device. That was not my intention.
Just, it's a lovely, well-executed opening scene. But it does bring me to bigger issues that I have with this storyline, not just coming off of episode 1, or part 1, I should say, but just the Gorn and how they've been used in general, specifically how in Strange New Worlds has been using them, because we've had several episodes now of this show framing the Gorn as just pure xenomorph-style monsters. And certainly, while it can get us like a quick thrill of like, ooh, it's a horror episode, the Gorn are a big threat, ultimately, the direction of that hasn't felt really Trek to me. Because the Gorn, as we originally met them in the original series, was certainly a guy in a rubber suit, which of course, classic Trek, but it was also about Kirk standing off against an enemy who seemed distinctly alien, but actually was intelligent and someone who could be reasoned with, even though we very much saw them as others and primitive and dangerous.
No. No, I won't kill you. Maybe you thought you were protecting yourself when you attacked the outpost.
So I was kind of really hoping that Pike saying the Gorn are just monsters, as we saw in part 1 of this episode.
I think it's safe to say that we don't understand the Gorn.
Well, I've seen them up close and personal, and they're not hard to understand, Bob. They're monsters.
Monster's a word to describe those who don't understand us.
And sometimes a monster's just a monster.
Was setting us up for a deeper investigation of the Gorn as an enemy. Like, maybe Pike realizes he's wrong, that the Gorn are more than just monsters. Or maybe we start to dig into who the Gorn really are, because we still have to have them be seen as like a threat and dangerous leading into the original series, because this is a prequel, but we could have had a little bit more nuance to them that I think was being set up. But sadly, this part 2 episode doesn't do anything with that. They're still just monsters throughout this entire episode. The episode even fully leans into them being this hive mind style alien that we can just mow down guilt-free as just a threat. It just makes the Gorn feel less unique and more like a mindless monster horror that you see in stuff like Marvel movies, but even less interesting than that because there's not a Gorn leader kind of character like the Borg Queen that gives the Gorn any sort of personality for our main characters to bounce off of, nor are the Gorn themselves all that interesting as just a general species like the Borg were pre-Borg Queen. So in either case, they're just a lesser version of the Borg or a Marvel-style monster horde that we can just mindlessly kill in the background. They're just sort of generic space monsters. And by the finale of the episode, the Enterprise is just luring them in like moths to a flame. And we also learn that they're becoming dangerous based on these radiation cycles of the stars, is influencing whether they're going to be aggressive or not, which again is okay. This is a well-executed thing for what it's doing, but it doesn't feel very Trek to me. It feels like it's just standard sci-fi monster fare, and not this sort of Trek thing of, ooh, can we understand these aliens? Can we get to know them? Even if we still see them as a threat, like having some empathy for them. Here they're just bug monster kind of things, or I guess lizard monsters technically, that we can just kind of mow down. Which again, fine, but it's standard. It's safe and standard. And it's weird because, like, there's a species with, like, spaceships, coordinated attacks, and, like, piloting skills at one point, but they're still portrayed as, like, just instinct-driven aliens that don't have any intelligence really on their own other than, like, just sort of acting on instinct based on radiation or to breed and, like, have Gorn eggs inside of people. And if we want to get real nitpicky here, the ending of the episode where Pike and crew essentially use the radiation to calm down and put to sleep the Gorn so they're not going to be aggressive for at least a few more years.
It triggered a long hibernation in the Gorn.
Yeah. But I can't help wondering if we didn't just create a problem for someone else to solve later.
Is literally the ending of Best of Both Worlds, where Picard tells Data to use his connection with the Borg as Locutus to put the drones to sleep.
Sleep, Data.
But instead of disabling one Borg cube here, we're somehow taking down the entire Gorn invasion fleet or species. It's kind of unclear on those. Kind of too big and too small at the same time. And again, very easy and repetitive and safe. Safe is like the biggest word that I can use here. It's a safe story. I mean, if we're being honest, the Orville a few years ago, which did its own version of Best of Both Worlds in its second season, kind of did this better with the Kaylons. You know, I have ups and downs with the Orville, but I do like the Orville generally. The Kaylons are even given more personality than the Gorn, and are even more nuanced species than the Gorn are in these episodes, which is kind of sad. All that being said, though, that one shot of the Gorn flying the drone during the final sequence, like the big rubber-suited Gorn sort of like flying the thing, was one of the funniest visuals I've ever seen. And some people may find that too cheesy and dumb. I think that's the kind of cheesiness I want in my Star Trek, is just like ridiculous visuals of weird aliens flying things. I'm down for that. Always down for that. If we bring it down on a more microcosmic level, there is some stuff that I do enjoy here in this episode. While I do kind of think Captain Patel not being able to go into cryosleep was a bit of a cop-out after the big cliffhanger, it does give the episode a solid ticking time bomb, one that worked well for me because it reminded me of how much I actually like Captain Patel. She's a character we haven't had a ton of time with, but she's always been like a cool like counterpart to Pike and seems to like stand on her own as her own full character even while she's in a relationship with Pike, which is not always the case for when women are written. And I was genuinely hoping that this episode wasn't going to fridge her, like she was going to be killed so we could have Pike have more man pain. And I'm glad they didn't go that route. And I liked that it did actually show us Pike kind of being thrown off his normal game here. Like, usually he's a very put-together captain, but we kind of can clearly see throughout the entire episode, and I think Anson Mount plays this so well, like an underlying anxiety that just is going throughout his entire performance. He's still putting up this good front of, like, a captain who's got it together, but you just get the sense that, like, he's just a little, like, unsettled. And I think that comes down to Patel and also just the overwhelmingness of the Gorn. I think Anson Mount plays it well, and I think it comes out in really great scenes, like that moment where Chapel is unsure if she can save Patel, and she calls up to Pike, and Pike sort of reassures her that, you know, I trust you. I trust that you can save Patel, but you can kind of see on his face, even though he's just saying audibly to Chapel, that he's visibly worried as well. So it's just very well-acted moments all around on that part. So I did really love that. That being said, though, if we move over to Chapel's storyline, I'm a bit more iffy on it. Like, again, plot-wise, it's not bad, just stuff that I've seen before. Like, someone's dying, there's a super risky surgery, the odds of death are 100%, and then all of a sudden they come up with some fun technobabble idea that makes it slightly less than 100%, but still very risky, and then they're out of time and they have to do the surgery, and oh, look, it actually works out because of how awesome and skilled they are. You know, again, not bad. It's structurally written very well. Like, it's beat by beat done exactly as you should do those beats, but it's not exactly anything revelatory. And I would be fine with that if like there was a little bit of flavoring in there that made it unique in its own sort of like context. And I do like some stuff that we get, like they use the Una's genetically modified blood to help Batel. And I am actually curious if that's going to come back around and have repercussions later, either for Batel or Una legally, like, oh, you broke the law to do this, or if it's going to medically like cause some things for Batel, like, oh, suddenly she's now getting stronger, has genetically modified stuff, or it's going to mess with her a little bit. So like, I hope the episode has some repercussions for this choice down the line. But in this episode, we don't get, it's not really dealt with much. It's sort of offhandedly excused by Jonas, like, oh, we're on and off the books mission, so it's not a big deal. In this episode, it's fine. We'll see if it sets up some later stuff down the line here. The other thing that the storyline is used for is Spock coming down and helping out Chapel, and it's just used to have them sort of talk about their relationship status during this emergency medical situation, to which I'm like, Spock, do we have to do this now? And I get it, the show is setting up, you know, both concluding their arc from last season and now setting it up for, like, they're going on, you know, kind of a breakup. So I get that that's what they're doing here. I guess I'm sensitive to it in this fact that, like, I don't like this storyline to begin with. It feels very limiting to both Spock and Chapel, especially Chapel, considering that's what her storylines always kind of revolve around, both in the original series and now here. And it's like, I want her to break out of romance plots with Spock. And even when she gets to be a medical officer dealing with a medical situation when Mbenga's not even there, she's still kind of only dealing with, like, the Spock of it all on a character level. So those emotional beats just didn't land for me, because it's just a storyline I don't care about, and it honestly kind of frustrated with. Also, just like on a side note here too, when they met up with the fleet, why didn't Batel get taken off the Enterprise? Even if, like, Chapel and Spock went with her to deal with that, it feels like if they were going to send the Enterprise right back out with the Gorn, they should have put Batel on another ship that they could have safely quarantined her, so that even if the Gorn did get out, they would have been safe and not had to treat Batel in the middle of a battle. I get it's like a fleet, so maybe they didn't have that option, but it just feels like weird that, like, we're going to send the Enterprise, the flagship, back out to face the Gorn with this ticking time bomb that could kill everyone on the ship there. And I know they've said they would kill her if they couldn't do anything, but it felt like an excuse to just keep her on the ship and still in the thick of the plot. In most TV shows or movies, if there's a plot beat where, like, it's only after I watch the episode that I think, like, oh yeah, that didn't make sense that they did that, then I won't, like, knock the episode because I'm not thinking about it in the moment. But here in this episode, I actually did think about it, so I am gonna knock it because I'm like, why wouldn't they get her off the ship? All that being said, they were technically doing a space Gorn abortion, which, you know, I find to be kind of funny. Like, even though I know they're trying to save Batel's life, it's just like, oh, we're just going to kill these Gorn babies. But then again, I'm thinking about, like, you know, women's bodily autonomy. Like, she has a right to, like, not have these things inside of her. So, like, yeah, no, do the space Gorn abortion. I'm 100% here for it. Moving on, though, I did really like the dynamic between Scotty and Pelia. I'm excited that Scotty seems to be, like, an ongoing part of the crew going forward, again, leaning into that prequel nature, but I like here, with his relationship with Pelia, we can kind of see that Scotty is not yet that miracle worker that we know he eventually will come to be, because Pelia is pointing out, like, you gotta work under pressure, you gotta believe in yourself. That's something that he will become known for later on. I love that Pelia is kind of still acting as his mentor and teaching him. Like, and by the way, I just love Pelia so much. I said this a lot in season 2, but I love her. She's that chaos gremlin mentor, and he's like the scrappy little genius still trying to figure out how to hotwire a warp core without panicking. And so we're watching him become that guy who can fix the warp core in 47 minutes and knows this ship like the back of his hand.
I know this ship like the back of my hand.
So I like that, like, setup for, like, who Scotty is and, like, the growing pains that he has to go through to become that miracle worker. So I like this setup here. And again, I also like Pike coming in and Pelia stepping in front of Scotty and being like, we got it, Captain, we can do this. And Pike just trusting them to get it done. Again, it goes back to that Captain holding it down for everyone else's sake energy that I already spoke about with Mount. The one weird thing, though, with that, though, is at the end of the episode, we do get that scene where Pike goes over and starts doing the Lord's Prayer over Batel. It initially kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Not because I'm against any religious representation in Star Trek. You know, I know Gene Roddenberry had a very secular push in being like, we don't have religion in the future. If you read a lot of, like, Roddenberry's interviews and stuff, though, he was always thinking about, like, God in spiritual sense in a really kind of interesting way. I'd actually highly recommend, there's a book by Yvonne Fern called Gene Roddenberry, The Last Conversation, where he talks about, like, his views on God in a really interesting way. But he was very secular about it. So seeing, like, this overt, like, religious element come in kind of weirded me out too, a little bit in that regard, especially, and this is kind of the bigger reasoning that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, in the context of how Strange New Worlds has been leaning into more traditionalist storytellings around women, and it felt a little bit too much in line with how much of the kind of gender normativity stuff in American culture is so often tied in with Christianity and especially Catholic frameworks. That being said, though, I am someone who does believe that Trek should be open to having more representation of culturally religious expressions as part of the infinite diversity of humanity's future, like us seeing a Starfleet character wearing a hijab in the background of Lower Decks that caused a stupid controversy, a couple of years ago. And I do believe that Pike's backstory also has included in it that his father was a pastor. So I think it makes sense that Pike would go towards, a prayer in a moment of real desperation and worry for Batel. And so I kind of have mixed feelings about it, considering all of those things. What didn't really work for me, though, with it was that I feel like the stakes around Batel's life being in danger were kind of resolved at this point in the episode. Like, Batel had already clearly been established to be fine, or at least going to be making it through. So Pike's prayer doesn't feel like he's reaching for this in a moment of desperation. It feels like the script kind of reaching for more gravitas in that moment than it really earned. Like, I think it actually would have been better if earlier in the episode, Pike was having a moment of crisis, like, how do I deal with the Gorn? And he goes down and sees Batel, and, we don't know if she's going to make it or not. And that's when he has that moment of, like, reaching for prayer. I think that would have shown a lot more vulnerability to Pike, rather than it being like, oh, we've hit the end of the episode, and Batel's fine, the Gorn are dealt with, and now he's reaching for prayer. It didn't read as well for me for his character. And then it kind of also comes just sort of clouded in all that, like, stuff that rubs me the wrong way about Christianity a little bit, just given the context of sort of the traditionalist vibe. But again, that's nothing I want to hold against Pike the character or people who are religious generally. That being said, though, jumping back a little bit, I know I'm kind of jumping around the episode here, I did really like Pike's big argument with Admiral April early in the episode, that they need to go back and hit the Gorn hard and show strength and punch first to show that they're not prey.
They will push this hegemony line further and further into Federation space, and you know they will. And by the time we actually get around to doing something about it, it'll be way too late.
And I like it because it is literally the same exact argument that Michael Burnham made all the way back in the pilot episode of Star Trek Discovery against the Klingons.
Whenever the Vulcans crossed paths with Klingons, the Vulcans fired first. They said hello in a language the Klingons understood. Violence brought respect. Respect brought peace. Captain, we have to give the Klingons a Vulcan hello.
You know, the one where she was going to do the whole Vulcan hello thing and punch the Klingons in the face, and everyone online still argues that she was wrong to this day because we cannot talk normally about fucking Michael Burnham anywhere online. You know, obviously she was 100% right in that situation, not about the mutiny part, but she had the right strategy at the very least. Especially considering that the Klingons in that episode, unlike the mindless Gorn here, were portrayed as cult-like extremist anti-diversity fundamentalists. They may have had a point about the Federation's cultural assimilatory hegemony, but they were also rigidly intolerant and unwilling to compromise. Basically, the kind of people where the only option left is to punch the space Nazi in the face. Which, controversial take here, already makes the Discovery Klingons way more interesting than anything the Gorn have done in Strange New Worlds. And here Pike is making the same exact argument, and is shown to be 100% correct as well. So, just pointing that out, because the internet cannot be normal about fucking Discovery or Burnham. I love Discovery, because it was trying to always do bold new things. It was very messy, not always doing them very great, but it was always trying, which I kind of appreciate versus more Strange New Worlds, a lot safer storytelling. And also, funnily enough, the final battle here with the Gorn takes place also in a binary star system, just like the Star Trek Discovery pilot, and that has to be a callback, right? Like, I refuse to believe that that's just a coincidence. That being said, though, too, I was a little bit confused on how the binary stars were used to get the Gorn back to their home world. Like, I liked the concept that the Gorn used the stars to power their ship instead of wasting their own energy, and that somehow gets them access to their home world or whatever, but I just wasn't logically sure how that worked. Like, was their planet between the star system, or did it, like, slingshot them to, like, another part of the galaxy? Like, I was very confused by what was happening with the binary stars that the Gorn were using to get to their home world. Like, it didn't really make sense to me. Like, is it through the binary stars? Because then, if not, just why not go around the stars with your ships? Like, I just didn't get it. Maybe that's just me. Like, if someone in the comments can explain to me what the hell was going on there. I was very confused about it. And again, I've already talked about the Gorn being like radiation moths to flame instead of complex beings, so I won't rehash that discourse that I had earlier on. But I will say it does kind of feel like a missed opportunity when we get to the stuff with Gorn and La'an on the Gorn ship. Because First things first, I did really enjoy the organic look of the Gorn ship. Like, organic, gooey, bio-horror vibes is everything that I want. Like, give me slimy walls and questionable fluids everywhere. Sure, we've seen this kind of design before. Mass Effect 2 kind of comes to mind most obviously. The Wraith in Stargate Atlantis also come to mind. But at the end of the day, I'm just a goo girl. I like having more goo the better. Please do not clip that out of context, people. Also, speaking of goo, I loved that there was a ship pipe. Their guns were in a waste disposal unit. That's gross in a nasty way. And I also continue to love La'an. She's honestly become one of my favorite characters on the show. I think she's got some of the most complexity out of any of the characters, especially because she's an original character. And I like the fact that she's the one to wake up here because like she's had some sort of experience with the Gorn and maybe can resist their weird fluid knockout goo stuff. And she sort of takes charge and saves not just the Enterprise crew, but literally all of the colonists. Like, that feels like a great arc for her, building off of her trauma with the Gorn and not being able to save her brother. Like, the Gorn may end up just being generic monsters in this episode, but the emotional payoff for her character works really well. It gave me very much Ninth Doctor, everybody lives just this once energy that I really, really liked.
Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once. Everybody lives!
Like, she finally gets to save everybody in a way that she's never been able to do before when it came to the Gorn. I also really loved Ortegas getting to pilot them out of danger. I was genuinely worried they were going to kill off Ortegas. Seeing her bleeding out while still flying the ship had me on the edge of my seat. I was actually legitimately scared for her, and that gave me the most tension out of the episode anywhere. I always love when Ortegas gets to shine. She's a character who does not get enough, especially after season 2 where we were promised that she was going to get more. She didn't really get more other than her I'm Ortegas, I fly the ship beat that I've already talked about. And this does end on another one of those beats of I'm Ortegas, I fly the ship, which feels like the writers are kind of in on the joke now.
America, Ortegas, I fly the ship.
But that being said, I do really hope she gets more this season. She deserves to be more than just a catchphrase and a quip and just saying how good of a pilot she is. Again, she's a great pilot, deserves to be celebrated, but like she should be more than that, and I hope we get to see that this season. Give the girl a plot line, which we'll come back to. But at the end of the day here, Hegemony Part 2 is overall, like I said, a solidly executed, action-packed season premiere. It's way more cohesive as a season premiere than like season 2's with that super weird super soldier detour we got with Mbenga and Chapel in that episode, and there's no forced plot beats like Spock stealing an Enterprise for no reason that just undercuts the other times that they stole the Enterprise. So like it's justified much more as an action-heavy opener than season 2's premiere was. But while the action's great, and I think the character beats are more or less strong, and it's all structurally tight, I just wish all of that solid structure was in service of something a little less generic. Something that feels a little bit more Trek. Like, flesh out the Gorn, do something more with Chapel and Spock than just talk about their relationship, which is something that I'm not super into. It's well executed, I just don't love what it's executing. But as a season opener, I will say it does get the job done, and it had me hoping that we were wrapping out the Gorn storyline for good, because now they're put to sleep, just like the Borg, because the Gorn storyline for me has just not been working. Like, it's, again, been fine, but kind of generic space xenomorph aliens action. But unfortunately, oh boy, we're not done with the Gorn, it appears, because that brings us to the second episode of this 2-episode premiere, Wedding Bell Blues. I really, 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 really wanted to like this episode a lot more than I ended up doing. Because when I heard that Rhys Darby was going to guest star in Strange New Worlds, I was legitimately very, very hyped. He is such a perfect fit for both this show specifically, but also Star Trek generally. He has that theatrical, character actor, campy, comedic energy that totally vibes with the sillier side of Star Trek, and I like the classic Star Trek that I love, of like the TNG era, the original series era, that Strange New Worlds like captures so well, and I love it when Star Trek gets more character actor focused, and Rhys Darby just kind of like fits that to a freaking T. And it also fits right into like the more comedic tone that Strange New Worlds kind of plays with from time to time, which end up generally being some of my favorite episodes of the show. like looking at Spock-Amok, Charades, the Lower Decks crossover episode, the Serene Squall, which I think still is probably one of my favorite episodes of season 1. So like when Strange New Worlds goes comedic, I really generally tend to like it, even if I have some issues with the like specifics of how those plots are done, like the biological essentialist vibe of the Charades episodes last season. So I was very much here for Rhys Darby being beamed up into Strange New Worlds. And then we saw the trailers drop, and he was doing the Q snap, right? Which is so iconic that I literally made the Q himself, John Delancey, do it in my own movie, Identities.
Showtime.
Which, by the way, if you haven't seen Identities yet, go watch it. It's over on Nebula, available now. I kind of want to pitch it as a TV series. So any of you out there are looking for TV show pitches, I have a show pitch for you. Yes, that's a plug. Link is down below for Identities. Girl gotta try to promote herself somehow. But anyways, yeah, when I saw the Q snap, I was like, okay, cool. But it also got me a little bit worried, because was this going to be another time that Strange New Worlds was just overtly dipping into the nostalgia well? And I think I would have ended up being really fine with Rhys playing a Q, but not the Q. Like, I think that would have kind of worked for me, just kind of playing in that sandbox of the Q continuum. And he is doing that, but where it all ends with this episode did not work for me. But we'll get there. I do want to focus on Darby, because he is great. He totally sells playing a comedic, fun, Q-style, godlike character. Like, he leans into that flamboyant, chaotic energy we've come to associate with Qs, and he's just very good at it. I actually really wish we had gotten to see him more in that full Andorian makeup when, you know, the other characters are seeing him as, because flamboyant Andorian is exactly the kind of weird Trek nonsense that I want more of. Yes, please. So I was here for all of that. And also his line, I can do anything I want, I'm a wedding planner.
I can do anything I want. I am a wedding planner.
As someone currently planning my own wedding, that hit real hard. However, I have to be honest with myself. The flamboyant wedding planner is kind of a very safe and broad stereotype that TV and movies have long used as sort of a queer-coded shorthand. I mean, it's like the gay-coded, like, planner, flamboyant planner vibe, right? And, like, it's never stated that Darby's playing gay or anything like that. It's never overtly that, but it is sort of leaning into that fairly easy stereotype. And I'm not offended. It's a very safe and conservative, and when I say conservative, I mean like just traditional and not pushing the boundaries and kind of leaning into gendered roles and sort of safe coding of characters in a way that just speaks to like the safeness of Strange New Worlds, right? It's not pushing anything or interrogating these roles. It's just kind of flatly doing them in a way that feels like, all right, I've seen these kind of stories before. And like even Pike lampshades the flamboyancy at one point when he like leans over to Spock and being like, oh, this, like, I've never seen an Andorian so flamboyant. Like it's very much lampshading the trope that they're using.
This wedding planner of yours is something. Never thought of Andorians as being so detail-oriented.
And it's just safe in a very regressive kind of way. I don't have a ton to say about the actual comedy of this episode. Instead of building an escalating farce, it just leans way too heavily on Rhys Darby's admittedly delightfully camp performance. And, you know, while we get like Corby trying to sabotage the wedding, it's just trite. It's very like standard stuff. And Corby's like a Blandy McBlanderson guy that we don't know. So I'm not really invested in his attempt to sabotage anything or win Chapel back. And I also don't care too much about Chapel and Spock's relationship all that much. So like their wedding stuff just like didn't get me either, of like Spock being super invested in it. So like the comedy was like fairly standard and really heavily relying on Darby's performance, which was great. But like there's only so much heavy lifting one performance can do. And I also didn't love the scene where Spock punches Corby. I mean, I get that Corby, from Spock's perspective, given the, you know, reality altering that's been going on, was being kind of a jerk, but I don't also like the man solves his problems by punching them. I did appreciate that Sam Kirk didn't punch Spock back later when Spock tries to get him to swing at him too. That felt like a little bit of subversion of that, but also still plays in that whole like, oh, well, he's not going to punch her because Bridezilla Chapel over here would getting crazy on him.
If I gave you a black eye the day before your wedding, Christine would kill me.
So like none of this comedy really like gets really much of a chuckle out of me. It doesn't land as well as like, say, last season where Spock like says he was about to murder Kirk for like leaving crumbs on the table, right? Like that was comedy gold.
Don't test me, Kirk! I will break you!
Clean it up.
Honestly, I wish if they wanted to do something kind of unique, they had played way more into the time loop stuff that we got a little hint at here with like the day restarting. Like, they could have had Darby resetting the day numerous times and it been kind of like an increasingly chaotic cause and effect comedy kind of episode. That could have been fun. But unfortunately, we only get one repeat of the day, and it barely factors really into the plot at all of, like, Spock having done this already. Also worth mentioning that the Federation's founding anniversary here is kind of similar to the Frontier Day from Picard Season 3, so that's kind of a fun little connection, even though they are technically 2 different holidays. But more Starfleet holidays. I'm here. Get your first Contact Day salmon. And building off of that, the broader problem for me with this episode is, surprise, if you already heard me talk earlier, it's once again centering the relationship drama between Spock and Chapel. And even worse than that, it doesn't give Chapel autonomy in any of it. She's basically reduced to the object of a love triangle between both Spock and now Corby, who are circling her like sad, entitled entities, where we're all just expected as the audience to kind of feel oh so heartbroken that Spock can't get the girl and how he needs to get over it, essentially. Is using women as a sort of background for like a guy needing to learn to get over her. It's just kind of exhausting. Especially because Jess Bush plays Chapel so wonderfully, and the show keeps sidelining her into these stale, romantic beats and storylines, especially deeply stereotypical, traditional heterosexual storylines, like she's in a wedding storyline and ending up with this guy, when they hinted at her being bisexual too in the first season.
It's more like a book than a page, and you said the same thing about that gal on Arjulius too.
And while technically beta canon, a recent Star Trek Pride Month comic featured Chapel dating a trans woman. It doesn't erase someone's bisexuality if they're in a heterosexual appearing relationship. But, like, there's no exploration of her bisexuality at any point. Like, any bisexual that I have known, as a bisexual myself, like, will talk about being, like, interested in women and stuff, like, but that has never come up at any point, and instead just focusing on her relationship with Corby and Spock. And, like, the relationship drama that comes from that. And it's very tired. And on top of that, I also am kind of rubbing the wrong way against Roger Corby. Because, look, I knew Roger Corby was coming. They set him up last season with a few mentions and that, you know, Chapel was going to go off to do her thing with him. And, you know, he was almost certainly going to come up regardless because he was introduced in the original series as Chapel's missing fiancé who, after vanishing, decided to go build sex robots on some random planet somewhere. And it's the episode with the penis rock, if anyone's curious. I mean, it's a funny episode for a lot of us, like, cheesy 1960s-ness, but, like, in terms of how it treats women and how Chapel specifically is written in that episode, it's real bad. Like, she literally only joined Starfleet because she's looking for her hubby, which is why she's technically not Starfleet in Strange New Worlds.
This is Nurse Chapel. Nurse Chapel is on civilian exchange from the Stanford Morehouse Epigenetic Project.
And even back in the 60s, Majel Barrett, as I mentioned before, thought the whole woman pining for her lost man thing was dumb.
She was a doctor to start with. And in order to go out and find her fiancé, she accepts a position on board this starship at a reduction in rank and a reduction in salary, of course. Signs on as a nurse because they already have the doctor, and off they go. She finds her fiancé, who turns out to be an android. Well, he's not going to do her any good. Right. So she immediately signs back on this ship again for a 5-year mission, again at a reduced in rank and pay, and immediately falls in love with a Vulcan who only comes in heat once every 7 years. Now, this woman's a loser.
So yeah, I wasn't really thrilled that Corby was coming back, but I at least hope they'd reframe her relationship with him from Chapel's perspective, but instead, we're just given this stereotypical, he swept me off my feet, with the most lame, obvious poem ever. Again, I get it. People sometimes love the cheesy, like, poem stuff, but it's like, it's just so tropey for a character like Chapel who has felt like not that. Also, it's doing the whole I dated my college professor kind of dynamic. Like, I get he's not technically a professor, but he was technically her advisor, boss. It kind of giving me ick vibes, if you know what I'm saying. And I'm just kind of disappointed that the show, like, they couldn't have found a better way to deal with that. And that's kind of this whole episode for me. It's leaning into this narrative comfort food. It's recognizable, easy to digest, and ultimately, like I said, culturally conservative in tone. I've seen this story before in its broader shorthand and pattern that the show has fallen into lately, where it's just very familiar and not very complex with the stories that it's doing. I could have seen this episode made in the 90s. This is like a very like TNG style episode, for better or for worse. You know, Star Trek should be pushing beyond that, and it's just a very safe storyline. Like, oh, look, the wedding goes wrong, and like there's this flamboyant guy. Like, again, there are some things I do like in this episode. I did like getting to meet Erica Ortegas' brother, who is apparently a documentary filmmaker, which is something we don't see much of in Star Trek. Like, I'm probably forgetting a few other instances, but the closest I can think of something like that was Jake Sisko being a war reporter during the Dominion War, but he was a writer, not a filmmaker in that. But I do like seeing more civilian careers kind of pop up in Star Trek. And I kind of wonder, like, what's a documentary like in the 23rd century? Like, what do they look like? Like, it has me curious, and I hope we get to see more of that. Unfortunately, though, we didn't get a lot of that here. Instead, he's more tossed into this straight up blah first sight flirtation with Uhura. Like, cool, I guess we're dragging Uhura into romance subplots now. Like, again, it's fine. It only takes up a few scenes, and we get this tired trope of, again, like, Ortegas is weirded out by her brother dating and hitting on her friend.
It's chaos, madness.
You don't trust me with your best friend?
You don't trust me with your baby brother.
Again, very tropey. I've seen it before, but it's fine. It's whatever. It's there. I'm sure they're setting him up to come back, and I hope we get to see more of him being a filmmaker, not in this Uhura's new maybe boyfriend who happens to be Erica's brother. Like, I hope we get some more with him and what makes him unique other than just being boy toy for Uhura, I guess. Speaking of new characters, though, we do get to meet the new ensign and nurse, who is given like one quick scene, but I do like him despite his very limited screen time. He seems really cool. I'm interested to see him sticking around. I'm curious what they're going to do with him. Seems like they're probably including him because he's going to be involved in like an episode storyline, like a Chekhov's gun they're setting up for down the line. I hope they do something interesting with him because he can seem a little bit reiterative considering we have both Chaplin and Benga. I'm wondering what function he's going to serve story-wise. And if he's going to feel like just a plot function in a later episode and they're just setting him up here, or if he is going to feel like a full-fledged out character. We'll see. Also, we get a little reiteration of Una's blood being used for Batel, which kind of reinforces that idea that I mentioned earlier, that like that probably is going to come back around at some point later on this season. And speaking of Batel and also romance plots, I'm really nervous about where we're going with Batel because we get that one scene with her, and like I said, I like her relationship with Pike. It's always felt like a relationship of equals between two captains, and I like seeing that dynamic, that like we're in a relationship with each other, we have feelings for each other, we're acknowledging that and dealing with like what that means, but we're also both two people who have our own careers. And so I thought that there was like kind of a new angle for a Star Trek show to explore because we haven't gotten to see that much. I think the closest was Sisko and Cassidy Yates, which is one of my favorite relationships in all of Star Trek, and they were both captains, but not necessarily both Starfleet captains. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of see them both pursuing the same career and what that was going to mean for the relationship. But now we kind of seem to have this scene which seems like it's a setup for Batel being unsure if she wants to accept a new command because it would take her away from Pike. I am begging this show. I am begging. Please do not turn this story into one about a woman who leaves her high-ranking, hard-earned career so she can be domestic with her guy. Please, we've had enough of that energy for women creeping into this show. Please do not do that. For the love of God. And it seems like what they're setting up, but I will give it the benefit of the doubt for now. And honestly, it's just, I've reiterated this a few times, it's frustrating to watch Strange New Worlds, which started off with such a great slate of numerous women characters, not to mention existing in an era of Star Trek as a franchise. We've had a lot of queer and gender diverse representation in Discovery, Prodigy with non-binary Zero, Lower Decks with bisexual Mariner, though the less said about Seven and Raffi and Picard, and their relationship, the better. But seeing the show backslide into super traditionalist patterns for women, heavy romance-driven arcs, frankly, aggressively heterosexual arcs. When I say aggressively heterosexual, I don't mean like I have any problem with like showing heterosexual relationships, but they're like tropey, how our culture always sort of frames heterosexual things. Oh, it's about women sort of being slightly deferential to the man, love at first sight, wedding plots, especially for the women. And I really don't like Captain Batel going down that route. That being said, I did like La'an teaching Spock how to dance. Weirdly, that works for me. Like, she's someone who's guarded and an intense person. And so to see like this moment of like she has a more vulnerable side to her really works well, especially since dancing kind of also fits with a tactical person. And especially we're coming off of the Gorn season opener. Not that she's over her trauma with the Gorn necessarily, but like she's faced a little bit of that trauma, and so maybe she's a little bit more willing to open up in a way that she hadn't been before. So I liked that. But speaking of the Gorn, though, we do get that final twist of the episode where Ortegas is apparently infected with something Gorn going on, and I gotta say, it kind of made me groan because I was really hoping we were just done with the Gorn for a while, because I've not been loving it, but here we are, fingers crossed, whatever they're setting up takes us in new directions than them just being monsters and space xenomorphs. At least it means Ortegas is getting something this season, finally, beyond just being a pilot, so we'll see how that goes. But all of this eventually leads me to something I've already hinted at, the end reveal of the episode, where it turns out that Darby isn't just playing a Q, it's very heavily implied that he's playing Trelane from the original series episode, The Squire of Gothos. Gothos? One of those two.
1, 2, 3, 4, gehen wir mit den Schissgewehr.
I mean, we get an energy being showing up to scold him like a parent, telling him that he has to stop meddling and revealing that he's actually just a child, at least by cosmic being standards, which is exactly like the end of the original series episode.
Oh, but you said I could. You promised. I never have any fun.
Stop that nonsense at once, or you'll not be permitted to make any more planets.
Oh, but you saw. I was winning.
And also, on top of that, that energy being is voiced by none other than John Delancey, who I mentioned before.
You are not listening to me. Shall I show you once more what the consequence is for disobedience?
And as someone who's had the joy of working with John before, who, by the way, is one of the kindest people I've ever worked with, like, he's an intense man, but, like, a very sweet man and very kind and very thoughtful. So, like, love John Delancey. I'm glad that he's getting more work in this show and popping up in Star Trek. I always love to see him. But I didn't really love this reveal for a few reasons. First off, it's kind of confusing. Like, with John playing the parent energy being here, they're clearly alluding to, first and foremost, that Trelane is a member of the Q Continuum without outright saying it. I mean, Darby's doing the iconic snap, John Delancey's playing the role, but if Darby is supposed to be Trelane, which again, they don't necessarily name, and if Trelane's a Q and he's a child, is he the same kind of kid Q that we saw from Voyager? Or is it another child Q that John Delancey's Q is also responsible for? And is that energy being even John Delancey's Q? Or just another Q in general? He is kind of acting like Trelane in a kind of childlike way, so like fits there, but casting the Q and leaning into all these familiar signals just, I think, raises more questions than it kind of answers. And on top of that, the idea that Trelane is a Q is a fan theory that's been around forever in Star Trek. I mean, even the Next Generation writers acknowledge the similarities to Trelane with the character of Q when Gene Roddenberry wrote those scenes for the pilot episode of the Next Generation Encounter at Farpoint. And on top of that, the recently passed, late, great, amazing Peter David already ran with that idea decades ago in his novel Q Squared, which, by the way, goes much harder with that idea than anything that this episode attempts. So making that theory of Trelane as a Q official canon doesn't really feel bold or clever. It just makes the Star Trek universe feel a little bit smaller, in my estimation. Like, why can't there be multiple godlike beings who out there who aren't all part of the same cosmic clubhouse? It's just the most obvious, safe, fan servicey reveal that they could have done. Like, that theory's been floating around since the 80s. It's, again, not awful, but it's not very exciting either. It just feels like Akiva Goldsman playing with his action figures and finally getting to connect the dots that he's wanted to since he was a kid. And it's fine. It's just kind of obvious, myopic, fan servicey, easy pickings. That being said, none of this is outright stated. It's all just implied that he's part of the Q Continuum, that he's even Trelane. It's very overtly signaled that that's the case, but it's never overtly said. So, you know, I can headcanon that that's not the case, and he's just a very similar other being, and I don't have to worry about it. But I think that's very much what they're signaling, and it's just a very like, oh, look, we're going to get all the fans sort of like thinking like, oh, Trelane's a Q, and finally confirming that theory. It's just, I don't know, it just feels very easy. And if we're talking about safe and regressive storylines, by the way, this episode doesn't just borrow the character of Trelane from the Squire of Gothos, it flat out recycles its ending almost beat for beat. The same ending that Futurama once mocked in its own Star Trek episode.
Malvar! Dinner time!
But Mom! I'm playing with my collectibles!
No!
All this time we thought he was a powerful super being. Yet he was just a child.
He's not a child, he's 34!
I mean, honestly, a lot of this episode is doing the exact same thing as that Star Trek Futurama episode. But unlike the original series episode, where that reveal that Trelane's obsession with violence and war is simply a childish impulse that more progressive adults like the quote-unquote more evolved humanity had moved beyond, which then allows us to comment on, in a Gene Roddenberryan sense, that violence is something that we should move beyond and reach out to each other in kindness and understanding.
Mr. Spock, still thinking about Trelane, is that it?
For the record, Captain, how do we describe him? Pure mentality, force of intellect, embodied energy, super being. He must be classified, sir.
God of War, Mr. Spock.
Well, I hardly find that fitting.
Then a small boy. And a very naughty one at that.
Here in this episode, it's instead used to reinforce queer-coded stereotypes in comedy and also to center Spock's emotional pain over not getting the girl. And look, maybe at the end of the day, I'm ultimately being a little bit too hard on this episode, because at the end of the day, I just look at what it is. And what it is an episode about, Chapel being the girl that Spock has to get over, and she is written as bouncing between two men, one of whom, Corby, we barely know or care about, and is kind of this, stereotypical romancy bro. And it all just kind of makes Chapel come off as kind of flirty and flighty and indecisive, which is exactly the type of writing I've seen for women so many times before. And instead of even giving her agency in that story, the episode just uses her to trigger a cosmic lesson for Spock's character, which is delivered by a well-performed but ultimately overtly easy fan service character, and very gay-coded stereotypical character at that. So more than anything, I just found this episode, outside of Rhys Darby, dull and safe and outdated in more ways than one. Wrapping out, I feel bad saying that because, and this kind of goes for both of these two episodes, neither of these episodes really excited me. And I want to be excited, especially after the mess that Section 31 was, that movie, and the cancellation of other Trek shows like Discovery, Lower Decks, and Prodigy. I, for the love of God, want Star Trek to be doing well, to succeed, to excite me again. And I specifically want Strange New Worlds to succeed. I shouldn't have to say this, given my whole history reviewing Star Trek shows in the modern era. I've always been trying to be, critical, yet positive and optimistic. But because this is YouTube and considering the world we're in right now, I want to be very clear. I never go into a Star Trek show or episode wanting to dislike it. I'm usually a very easy mark when it comes to that. But I also have to be honest. These safe traditionalist storylines aren't just a Star Trek problem right now. They're happening across the media landscape right now. We're in a moment, I feel, of cultural retrenchment as things just get more overtly conservative or even more far-right just around the world right now. And especially mainstream franchises, we're seeing companies like Disney and everything else pull these storylines inwards into very safe stories. Looking at Disney specifically, we've seen them, cancel shows that had more queer characters in it. And it's not just queer stuff, but it's everything of removing these shows that kind of were pushing the boundaries of the stories that we can tell, the kind of people that we can have in these stories, pulling it back to be more safe. And I want Star Trek to be the exception to that. I want them to be this franchise that pushes the boundaries, that says, no, we push forward even when it seems darkest. And unfortunately, it feels like Strange New Worlds is just doing more of the same. Being safe, pulling back. This is safe Star Trek. And that kind of saddens me right now, especially since it's the leading Star Trek show at the moment. It kind of feels like we're in that early 2000s Star Trek Enterprise era again, which is we have a prequel show that could be pushing boundaries, showing a new side of Star Trek, or doing at least something new within the Star Trek formula, but it's mostly just playing it safe. And when we're not getting the underwear gel scenes or the, post 9/11 torture is, still kind of works stuff that we got in Star Trek Enterprise with its sort of neoconservative energy, thankfully, we are getting traditional safe storylines for women in a time where women's rights and gender expression are under open attack, safe gender roles, safe storylines. The same all goes for the fan servicey stuff and the Gorn stuff. It's all well executed for what it is, but it's stuff I've seen before. Both of these episodes could have been done, and in some cases kind of have been done, in the 90s. And I think that's kind of disappointing to see in a Star Trek show. It's what's the point? And I think Trek should be pushing back against that, not quietly replicating it. So, I want Star Trek to be more boundary pushing than these two episodes are, and it frankly feels like Strange New Worlds isn't doing that. That being said, as I wrap out these reviews, I have heard from friends who have gotten screeners, and I've gotten the screeners as well, but I haven't watched beyond these two episodes yet, who have watched more of the season. They've told me that later on episodes of the season are much stronger. So I'm looking forward to the rest of season 3. I'm heading into the rest of season 3, as always, as I try to do with everything I review, with an open mind and hopeful heart. I want this show to excite me. I'm going to come into every episode being like, I want this episode to excite me. It's just a bummer at the end of the day that these first 2 episodes didn't start us off on that stronger foot. But at the end of the day, that's everything that I have to say. I know this was a long one, but there's kind of a lot of stuff that I wanted to lay the groundwork for, and Star Trek is my bread and butter, so I obviously have a lot of opinions. But what did you think about these 2 episodes? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Beyond all of that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper. Mwah.